One of the most common reasons we read anything is because we require information for something. Whether it is for a chicken casserole recipe, locating the correct fuel filter for a car, or identifying the right settings for a Craig jig to create pocket holes to join 1x3 boards together. Reading for and interpreting information is an important skill to master. So in this first lesson, we will be learning how to identify key details when we read, and then use that information to interpret the main idea of any given passage. To better understand main idea, we need to clear up some definitions of some key words. Typically, informational texts are going to have a topic and one or more main ideas about that topic. So the topic is the subject of the text. It is what the passage is about. Usually you will see this stated in the title. A good example would be a newspaper article. The headline of the article is the subject of the article. Next, the main idea is the point or points that the author makes about that topic. And usually the main idea is going to be found in the last sentence or two of the introductory paragraph. For example, we could have a topic on the Great Depression. The title of the article or passage would be Hard Times During the Great Depression. And the author's main idea could be many Americans suffered severe hardships during the economic disaster known as the Great Depression. So as we see, everything here is related to the topic of the Great Depression. The title tells us what the article is about, and the main idea gives us the key point that the author wants to get across. Supporting details are key details in the passage that will explain or support the main idea. So supporting details are going to be specific ideas or key pieces of information such as reasons, examples, statistics, definitions, quotations, and descriptions. Typically, supporting details are going to be grouped in paragraphs. Each paragraph will have its own mini main idea that supports the overall main idea or the key point that the author wants to get across. The main idea within each paragraph is usually stated as a topic sentence. Let's take a look at an example. Unemployment reached its peak in 1933, maybe the worst year of the Great Depression. More than 25% of all Americans who wanted to work were jobless. People looked for jobs, but their efforts were in vain. As one man put it, I felt hopeless. I had no way to support my family. There was nothing for me. All right, in this example, our topic sentence is highlighted. So unemployment reached its peak in 1933, maybe the worst year of the Great Depression. That is the key point that the author is bringing out in this particular paragraph. He uses, or she uses, two types of details to support this main idea. First, a statistic is used. More than 25% of all Americans who wanted to work were jobless. Okay, so that 25% tells us that 1/4 of the American people were not able to get jobs. He also uses a quotation. So this is from an individual who is explaining how the Depression affected him personally. I felt hopeless. I had no way to support my family. There was nothing for me. So as we see here, the author's key point is the Great Depression led to unemployment, and that period of unemployment was pretty bad in 1933. And to support that, he uses a statistic and a quotation. Main ideas are not always going to be stated directly. Sometimes we end up having to do a little bit of investigative work to try to understand what point the author is attempting to get across. In these cases, we're going to look for what is known as an implied main idea. The author may suggest or hint at the main point of the paragraph or even the entire article or passage. To determine the implied main idea, we're going to have to see what supporting details all have in common. During the Depression, people lived in makeshift wooden shacks in Central Park in New York City. In Arkansas, people were found living in caves. In Oakland, California, some people found shelter in sewer pipes. So let's take a look at the information and see if we can determine what is the implied main idea in this paragraph. Well, we see that he is talking about what people in different parts of the country had to do for housing during the Great Depression. So the details that we get are some people lived in wooden shacks in New York City. There were people in the state of Arkansas who had to live in caves. And in Oakland, California, we had people finding shelter in sewer pipes. So what these details have in common is that people had to make do with what they had. Taking all of this information together, we can see that the implied main idea is that homelessness was a terrible problem during the Great Depression. So now that we have an overview of main idea and how supporting details support the main idea, let's take a moment and see what we can do to put it all together. So typically, using the previous examples we've just looked at, the way that the passage is laid out is we get an overall main idea, which is many Americans suffered severe hardships during the economic disaster known as the Great Depression. The individual paragraphs are going to present a mini main idea that supports the overall main idea. So we see in paragraph 1 that unemployment reached its peak in 1933, perhaps the worst year of the Great Depression. So this is the main point the author is bringing out in this paragraph. Then we see 2 supporting details that support the mini main idea. We have an example and a quotation. So all of this information comes together to form one paragraph. In the next paragraph, we have another mini main idea, which is homelessness was a terrible problem during the Great Depression, which supports the hardships that the author is discussing as the overall main idea of the passage. And to support that homelessness was a terrible problem, he uses 2 supporting details of an example and a statistic. So once we combine everything together, we see that the author is trying to prove a point. He uses a couple of points to support that, and then he uses details to help support those many main ideas. So now that you have a better understanding of how main ideas and supporting details work together, you should be able to use that to identify what the author is trying to point out in any passage that you read, whether it's an informational text or even a literary text.